Module 4. Hi, I'm Joe Cerrone, and today we're going to work on our basic AutoCAD online course for Module 4. Module 4 deals with a number of things, but specifically I'm going to talk about today is the exercise on polylines. The polyline drawing located in Module 4 can be downloaded by right-clicking on this link and selecting Save Target As. I'm going to save this target to my USB in my Spring 2014 CAD 116 folder. I've already done this exercise once, so I'll just replace the file. Then I'll select Open to open the file in my AutoCAD. And so what we have here is an exercise that shows different ways that we can use polylines. If we look back at the assignment in the online module, what I've instructed you to do is to download the polyline drawing exercise, open the drawing in AutoCAD, create a layer and duplicate the polyline exercise. And then what we're going to do is we're going to save the polyline with our initials, replacing the XX, and put it in the D2L Dropbox. So let's get started with that. We've downloaded and opened the drawing in AutoCAD, and what we're going to do now is to select the Home tab and to create a layer. Now, getting back to the interface, let's set up our interface so that they all look consistent. This bar right here allows us to turn on the menu bar. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable the menu bar. And what that'll do is allow me to have more access to more commands across the top here. Not sure why it seems to be a little bit slow, and we can enable or disable that, and I find it's best to keep that enabled. The other thing I want you to do is to disable the use icons, and if I enable it, you can kind of see what it looks like, because it's kind of difficult to understand which commands we're using for our running snaps down here at the bottom if they're as hieroglyphics or glyphs. So now that we have the user interface set up, we're going to take a look at creating a layer. Over here is our layers commands, and they're all grouped in one area. If we click on the layer properties button, we can create a new layer, and I'm just going to call it Polyline, and I'll set the color for that polyline as black. Line type is continuous, and typically when I draft I'll use a 0.6 mm line weight for visible lines. I'll make that layer current, and then I will close my layer manager. Now that I have that layer current, I can do the exercise. I'm going to turn on my snap and my grid, and I'm going to take a look at this first polyline exercise. It's very basic. What we're going to do is we're going to repeat what we see on the screen. So we're going to draw this polyline. We're going to have our grid and snap set up, and we'll go over here to polyline, and we'll select the line, and we'll draw that vertical, horizontal, and you'll notice that the cursor gives me feedback in 1/2 inch, actually in 1/8 increments, which is what I want. And then when we get to this point, we can either use an end object snap, or I can type C for close. I'm going to type C for close, and that's kind of a trick, because when we start creating polylines, what we're really doing is we're creating shapes. And so when I hover over this polyline, it treats it as one continuous shape rather than each individual line. And so that's the first exercise, this polyline. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another polyline, and we're going to do a modify command using the chamfer function on it. Now we could just copy this one over here, but for the sake of doing it twice, to make it clear, I'm going to do it again. So I select the polyline command, and I'll come over here, and again I'll track over and up. And again, I'm creating these 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch line segments. And when I get to the end here, I type C for close. I'm going to move this over a little bit so it's lined up above the other one. Move. I'll use a crossing window or a green window versus a blue window. You say, what's the difference? Well, a crossing window will select everything it touches. And so I'll select the geometry, hit enter, give it a base point, and I'll just bring that over so it lines up above the other object. Now that I've done that, I'm going to enable the chamfer command. Chamfer and fillet are very similar, and so they're grouped under the same command on the Modify toolbar. I'll select chamfer, and since I have my dynamic button on, I can hit the down arrow and I can select distance. And the distance is 0.125, which is already in the command. It's a modal command. And so the first distance it will do is trim 1/4 of an inch horizontal and then 1/4 of an inch vertical. So I verified my distances, and now what I can do is I can either select 2 lines and work my way around this project. Right mouse click, repeat chamfer. Or a faster way, and what I'll do is I'll undo that, is to come into the chamfer command and select the down arrow and select polyline. Since I've already programmed the distance in, I can just select the polyline, and you can see that it will apply that 1/8 inch chamfer all the way around the polyline. And then the next function is to use the list command to find the area. We'll come over here to our utilities and we'll select the area command. The area command will either allow us to trace a shape, and so if I was to go through and just trace some geometry and say I wanted to find the area of this box and then hit enter, it will give me the area of that in square inches. And the units are based on the units which I've set up for the drawing. I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to do the area command again by selecting measure, area, and this time I'm going to hit the down arrow and I'm going to say object, and I'm going to click on the object that I just created, and it gives me an area of 1.2188. I'm going to go to my annotate tab, and I'm going to come in here with multi-line text, and I'm going to create a little box. I'm going to say area equals 1.288, and let's make that a capital A. Close the text editor. And we're going to do the same thing for these other 2 projects. Rather than draw this object again, I'm going to come over here to the Home tab, and I'm going to select Copy, and I'm going to create a copy. This time I'm going to use a blue window, or a non-crossing window. And when I don't select the entire object, nothing is selected. So you can use either a crossing window, a green window, or a non-crossing window, a blue window, to discriminate or to select more critically what objects you want for your modify command. Now that I've created a copy of the polyline, I'm going to use the fillet command. And fillet is hiding here under the chamfer command. And what I'm going to do here again is to check my radius. So I'll hit the down arrow, and these are the options within the fillet command. I'll say radius 0.125, enter. And I have sub options now within that, and so I can hit the down arrow again, and I can say polyline, and I can select my polyline. Again, we're going to compute the area, measure, area, down arrow, object, and I get an area of 1.2366. Annotate, multi-line text, and I'll close the text editor. And I'm going to move that with a grip. Keep everything nice and neat. I have two more polyline exercises, and again I'm just going to copy my first one. Select the object to copy, hit enter to end the selection. Select the base point. Where am I going to move it from? You have to think of it like it's a robot and that it doesn't know where anything is. And so if I'm going to move this cross from the center, I can say this is my base point, move it from the center, and move it over to the center here. And I could also, while I'm here, it stays modal, meaning it stays in the copy command. Let's get the second one over here and let's complete this exercise. We're going to modify this polyline to put a width on it of 0.125. In older versions of AutoCAD, they didn't have the line weights or the widths available. I'm going to enable the line weights. Let's just clean this up down here a little bit. I really don't need OSnap and OTrack. I do want dynamic on, but I don't need dynamic UCS. That's a 3D command. And I'm going to also disable this transparency. And so these are the base commands that we'll use here down at the bottom. Getting back to our assignment here, you can see that the line weights have kind of jumbled my text a little bit. And that's one of the reasons that I will take my text and I will put my text on a separate line layer. And so I'll put it on the text layer. And on that text layer I don't have a line weight. And that keeps the letters more clear to see. And so as we start to work with CAD, we will find that there are certain rules that we will follow for line width and line weights. So prior to having line weights available within the layer command, we were able to change the width of objects with polylines. And what I can do is I can type in PEDIT, polyedit, and I'll select the polyline. And what I'll do is I will change the width of that polyline to 0.125. And then I will hit escape and exit. To move the vertices, I can click on this object and I will have these blue grips. And what I will do is I will click on a grip, which will make it hot, and then I will move it. Grips are very useful. They work quickly and they allow you to modify the existing geometry. Down here we have this Displays Campus Lake, and oftentimes we make maps with AutoCAD. And in order to create a line that represents a pencil sketch or a topology, we'll use the sketch command. And the sketch command is really very hard to find. You're not going to find it under the draw command here. So we will type that in, S-K-E-T-C-H, sketch. And what you'll find is down here at the bottom, it asks you for an increment amount. The smaller the increment, the finer the lines. And so if I enter sketch and I start to click and put down my sketch lines, it kind of looks like that old Atari type gaming where I have a very low resolution line weight. And so I'm going to modify the increment sketch, and what I'll do is I will type I for increment. Capital letters allow me to go into the sub options, and I'll type 0.05 and we'll take a look at how that looks. I'll turn off my snap and this is much smoother. Click the mouse button again and hit enter, and that I can work with. And what sketch lines are is really polylines. So I'm going to delete this and then I'm going to come back over to my drawing. And what I'd like you to do is to just make a sketch within the boundaries emulating the Displays Campus Lake. Sketch. My increment level has now been set to 0.05. I click the mouse and it puts the pencil down. And what it's doing is it's creating all these really short polylines that are lined up endpoint to endpoint. So you have to take your time with this. Click the mouse to raise the pen up and hit enter. And so that's our polyline of the lake. If we want to, we can click on it and put it on that blue layer for object, and then hit escape. It looks a little bit more like our topology map. This exercise is a little tricky, and what it does is it allows you to use polylines with arcs, and you can actually decrement the width as you go through it. And so if I select polyline and then I give it a starting point, and then I select width, and we'll start off with a width of 0.25 and we'll end up with 0.2, and then we will go and we will select arc. I can then start to recreate, and then what I'll do is I will hit the down arrow and select width again. I'll start with 0.2 and I'll end with 0.15, and I'll bring that out a little bit farther. Down arrow, width, 0.15, 0.1, down arrow, width, 0.1, 0.05, down arrow, width, 0.05, and we'll end at 0. And then we'll hit enter to terminate the command. So that gives us our polyline, and you can make some interesting shapes with that. Lastly, we'll use the polyline to record some graphing functions. And so on the graphing functions, basically all we're doing is using a CAD system to graph this information. And it's not meant to be more than plotting points on a graph. And so what we're going to do is we're going to plot the X and Y points given in this table. Before we can plot the points, we need to set up a point style. And point styles are set up under Utilities, Point Style. And what I'll do is I'll select this point style right here so that we can actually see it. I'll say OK. And then what I'll do is I'll put a point just eyeballed at these locations. And so pretend you're working on a piece of graph paper. And what we'll do is we'll say draw a point. And we'll look at our first one, 0, 0, and we'll put that here. Then we'll look at our second point, 1.3. And then we'll look at 2, 1. 2 units in X, 1 unit in Y. 3, 2. 3 units in X, 2 units in Y. 4, 2.75. 5, 2.5, 6, 1, 7.25, and 8, 0. And we could make these more accurate, but the idea here is that we're working with polylines and we're working with a spline. So what we'll do is we'll select the draw and we'll select spline, and we're going to use a spline with control vertices. And when we do this spline with control vertices, what we're going to do is we're going to enable an object snap that's going to snap to each of the nodes. And so I'll enable the spline command, and then I'm going to go to my O snap. I'm going to right click and I'm going to turn on node, and then when I turn on my O snap, when I hover over a point that is a node, I will get the node command. I also get some other ones, and so I can turn off the ones I'm not using. And so I don't want intersection, and so I'll select node, node, node. And when I get to the end, I hit enter, and that is my polyline. Now you say, well, it's a little bit off here at these points, and that's why I selected the spline with control vertices. I can actually grab these control vertices and I can kind of tweak that geometry to go through those points. This one seems to see how it's O-snapping even though I'm trying to put this point here. So what I need to do sometimes is to disable the O-snap, because the O-snaps are stronger than the cursor. I'll hit escape, and then I'll put my student name here. And this completes the polyline exercise of Module 4.